Okay.
It is exactly 2 o'clock.
Okay, perfect.
She's timely.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah. Alrighty. This is a little basics of garden design. Well, let me first say welcome to Juniper Level Botanic Garden, the home of Plant Delights Nursery. I am the garden curator here. I don't really know what that means. And I have no formal training in design, but I've been gardening all my life. And you can learn a lot about design from visiting other gardens. And I think I learn more from bad design than I do from good design, because, you know, when I see something, it's like, well, there's a lot of pretty flowers in that garden, but it looks kind of ugly. You know, I'm just figuring out what's going on. And, you know, if I may be so bold as to say, I developed a sense of design, but without sort of any knowledge of what the terminology was. And I was asked to deliver a lecture on garden design after designing some well-known gardens. I realized I had to figure out a language for what was going on, because you can arrange things without knowing what, you know, sort of knowing what language to use for that. And so the very basics are, this is my 30-second synopsis of this class. In garden design, as in most garden design, and we're talking about what the eye sees primarily, you're working with 3 elements: color, shape, and texture. There are 2 things you can do with that. You can repeat those elements, or you can contrast those elements. So of course you'll end up doing both. So that's the end of this class. Thank you for your time today. Yeah, so that is truly the basics. So everyone understands color. Well, let me go back one step. You know, before you do anything, you have to know 2 things about the plants. How big does it get? You know, this fir here, this conifer right here, is not particularly well placed because it's going to get 100 feet tall. But I think it was planted in that location because nobody thought it would live this long. So you have to know how big something gets. It doesn't matter that it's only this tall today and it's only in a little pot. What matters is how big is it going to be at maturity, or at least in a reasonable amount of time. So you don't plant something where it doesn't have room to grow, or the super common thing, you plant things that want to be 20-foot tall evergreens in front of your picture windows. A whole lot of garden maintenance is created by poor plant choice and placement. So, and then the other basic thing you need to know is what are the growing requirements of that plant. When we're young and stupid, we think, oh, well, you know, I'll just water that every day so it thrives in this dry spot. Well, you know, why make extra maintenance? But between this rain garden behind you at the edge of the bed and this xeric hill here, they're 2 totally, well, very different growing conditions. This stays constantly moist. This is actually a rain garden. It captures the runoff from the roof. This planting was designed so it had really sharp drainage. That soil is half gravel. It's mounded up to increase the drainage, because desert plants don't mind rain, but they have to have really good drainage. So you wouldn't try to grow agaves here, and you wouldn't try to grow bog plants like the pitcher plants there. So, you know how big a plant gets and know what its growing conditions are, and you'll, you know, the plants are more likely to thrive, and they're more likely to be lower maintenance than if you're fighting the site. So let's get back to the basic garden design. So everyone understands color, because I think most people want color. I've worked in a number of public gardens. The director at one garden told me the 3 most important things in a public garden are One, color. The second most important one is color. Does anyone want to guess what the third most important thing is? Color. Well, you know, that's just opinion, but his point was that the visiting public wants color. And, you know, some of the public displays that, you know, like Epcot Center or something, you know, you might as well be looking at wallpaper because they're not really interesting plantings, but they are certainly colorful. And so we're talking about flower color, but of course foliage color. And nowadays it's so easy to have colorful gardens because not only is the selection of flowering plants so much bigger than it used to be, but so many plants are now also available with colorful foliage. You know, 50 years ago, we had a handful of plants with yellow foliage. Now a lot of plants have not just selections with yellow foliage, but some with burgundy foliage, and some with, you know, we have these modern hydrangeas and crepe myrtles that have black foliage. So if you want color, it's real simple to do today. And I'm not talking about how to make a colorful garden, I'm talking about garden design. The other thing is shape. Some plants have like a very distinct shape for the whole plant. You know, the agaves and similar things have a very definite shape to them. Because our focus here is herbaceous perennials, and I love herbaceous perennials. A lot of herbaceous perennials don't have a particular shape. They might be colorful, but they're just sort of like a amorphous mound of color. So, you know, contrasting that with plants with architectural shapes, and it doesn't have to be agaves. You know, in a shade garden, it might be hostas with big leaves, or aspidistras with, again, bold leaves. Those are shapes, but not only just the shape of the whole plant, but also the shape of individual things, like the flowers on this coreopsis. The other thing is texture. And plants range from fine texture to bold texture. Again, you know, bold texture, and then further on there's that muhly grass, the bamboo muhly, that's very fine texture. Now, I said working with those three elements, you can do two things. One is repeat those things. So you might be repeating a color scheme. You might be repeating some shape in the plant. And repetition sounds boring, but repetition is what keeps a composition whole. It's like a repeating theme in a classical piece of music. You know, it comes back to a theme and it sort of holds the whole piece together. A lot of garden displays are like all contrast, and they end up being sort of, you know, too busy and too scattered and no focus to it. And so, you know, repetition can make that particular planting hold together. So those are the basics. Do you have questions at this point? We'll go just travel a little bit and look at examples. Yes, Chris?
How come I don't see that amazing architectural plant cardoon?
Cardoon is the wild parent of the globe artichoke, the artichoke we eat. It's not so good a summer plant in that it's sort of semi-dormant in the summer. This would be a good time to plant it. It's essentially a huge thistle, and it has these great big silvery leaves, and it's a great bold form and texture for the fall and winter and early spring garden. It's a short-lived perennial, so you'll occasionally have to start it all anew, but you can buy seed for it, or a lot of garden centers have new plants of it this time of year.
You haven't mentioned, here's my dilemma.
Yes.
I bought a house that somebody landscaped the front of it when they built the house in 2006.
Yeah.
I bought the house in 2016.
Yeah. They
put in 2 crepe myrtles.
Yeah.
One in a bed that was like the top of the slope down towards the road, and 2 that were a little further in, closer to the house. So this is the bed I've got, and it had juniper in it, spreading juniper.
Yeah.
But I didn't do the cutting off the crepe myrtle And now it's gotten a lot bigger and shadier, and a whole lots of the spreading juniper died,
Yeah.
leaving big roots. And this is the question really. What about the impact of when you've got a bed with different sunlight? The center of that garden gets lots of sun.
Yeah.
But the ones where the crepe myrtles are and the crepe myrtles on this side, they hardly get any sun. They only get afternoon sun.
Yeah.
These get some sun that makes it through, kind of a crack between the trees. How do you balance things when you've got such different sunlight conditions?
Well, we have right over here in front of the house a bed that is in this part of the bed under the fir is in full shade all day long.
Right.
That side where it doesn't have a tree canopy over it is mostly in full sun.
Right.
And so we have different plants in those two areas, and a lot of those plants would not succeed if they swapped location in the bed, because like the maidenhair fern would look lousy if it was out in the sun. And you know, well, actually an awful lot of the things over there are more shade plants, but Tony likes to experiment with things and put hostas in sun. So we can all learn that they don't like sun. But your plant selections are going to be different. Now, you're using the term balance if you mean like from a design standpoint. Well, let's, you know, in this corner we have a big bold fatsia, the Japanese Aurelia. On that side we have Schefflera. They're cousins, but different genera. You know, they're different plants, but because they're sort of the same size and same texture, they're balancing each other. And then if you're working with small plants, sometimes a small plant can balance a big plant if there's a big mass of them. You know, one oxalis would not balance that. But if you had you know, this is a 6-foot planting of oxalis, well, you know, the size of the mass in that case is more important than the size of one plant. So that's one way to achieve balance. And there's different types of balance. There's, you know, the symmetrical balance, like Louis XVI in Versailles, you know, he had miles of alleys of trees where everything on the right side was exactly the same as the left side. That's a symmetrical balance, but you can also have a non-symmetrical balance where they're different things, but you know, the masses of the two sort of balance each other.
Because that initially, it clearly was they planted the spruce all the way across.
Yeah, sure.
Sunlight part of the spruce is fine.
Yeah.
The crepe myrtles are nice and tall and fine. And
Yeah.
they're exactly balanced, and exactly love this one there and this one there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I hadn't thought about trying to, okay.
Yeah, I'm curious, is the house symmetrical where the white side is exactly the same as the left side? Oh, okay, well then that kind of symmetry makes sense, yeah. Well, these classes are not meant to be comprehensive, and they're not supposed to go terribly long, but we can, you know, everywhere I look, I see examples. In your mind's eye, if you could subtract the canna, then we have everything else is sort of the same texture, sort of a medium to fine texture. But the canna really takes this combination of plants from being sort of a too busy, frithery, I don't even know if frithery is a word, sort of too much fine texture. This big bold leaf is a really pleasant contrast to all these fine textures. You know, this Lepichina is sort of the same texture as the crepe myrtle, sort of the same texture as the Chamaecyparis above and the elm above that. And I just think this combination, I mean, the canna really does a lot to make this, take this composition from being kind of boring to more interesting, because the canna sort of highlights the other thing by contrasting with them. And we have a little bit of echoing going here in colors, because a bit of this canna flower and then the young fruit on the cannas are the sort of the same purple of this Lepichina. think they've, there's its name. I think they've lumped this Lepitina now with salvias. It's a lot like a salvia. The canna is one of my favorites. That's panache. Real beautiful thing. Shall we look for, you know, we've already talked about shapes and textures. You know, the Dasylirion is pretty much the same shape as the yucca and the agave, but it's a finer texture, so it's more interesting to have this than just another agave. And though the color range is real limited, you might say we're echoing, I mean repeating colors, but there's sort of variations on a theme. And then you know, the heliotrope is in bloom all summer long, so we enjoy it for its color and for the buckeye butterflies visiting the flowers. But you know, I don't know how you would describe the shape of this plant. It's sort of amorphous, but then you take something really architectural like this opuntia and yucca, it makes for a more interesting composition. And then the bamboo muley, which is not a bamboo, it just gets that name because it looks like a bamboo, is a lovely sort of fine texture. And grasses also add the element of movement in gardens, which is really a beautiful feature. But I don't know, I'm happy to answer questions, but I sort of feel like that might be good for tiny little presentation on garden design. Yeah, are there additional, yes, I'm happy to have questions.
Is there another element of when does it have its most, I don't know, appreciated look, color, blooms?
You know, I have designed gardens, been paid to design gardens, and usually designing them on paper. And you know, most people want gardens to be as colorful as long as possible. So maybe an answer to the question is some techniques that are useful for creating colorful displays year-round. Would that sort of answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah. I think some of the plants, they don't have to be herbaceous perennials, but you know, annuals certainly have their role in gardens. Some of them can be counted on to bloom for months and months, like this heliotrope or like some of the salvias. They are a useful source of long season color, and then you combine, you know, the plants sort of fall into two groups. One, the big showstoppers, but most showstoppers like lilies or daffodils or peonies or iris, it's a 2-week display, 3-week display, and then nothing the rest of the year. I don't know if love is the right word, but I love to see the people walking out of a big box or any garden center with, you know, a potted foxglove or a potted lily, and they're just the happiest person in the world because they bought this glorious thing that's going to bloom all summer. No, when they're buying it, that's as good as it gets. Some of those things, like most lilies, are going to come back and get better year after year, but it's still just going to be a 2 or 3 week display. And so those showstoppers are good because we love them. I love daylilies and iris, but you know, they come and go, but you sort of combine them with these plants that are maybe not showstoppers. You're not going to write home about this scarpoid cyme of flowers, but you know, they are a wonderful foil to the things that come and go. The other thing is, I always ask, well, what does a plant look like out of bloom? Some plants look like poop out of bloom. But some plants are beautiful foliage after their bloom. Can I think of them? Any examples?
I remember coming here to see whether or not I wanted to have baptisia in my yard.
Yeah.
Because the baptisia are beautiful when they're in bloom, but I wanted to. But I came back in the fall to see what they look, and you know, some of them look a little raggedy because
Yeah.
it's hot, but it still just looks like a cute little bush
Yeah.
in a spot. So
Yeah.
that's what you plan for later on.
Unless it's that white one over there.
Yeah, there's that.
The white one? The one with silver foliage?
Yeah.
Well,
that's-
well, this is another baptisia. It's you know, tomorrow is the first day of fall. This is Baptisia perfoliata. It only has one or two little yellow flowers at the base of each leaf. You would not grow it for its floral display. But it is one of the most noticed plants in the garden. When the foliage is fresh, everybody stops to look at it. It looks like eucalyptus. So again, it's a plant that we enjoy looking at the foliage all through the growing season. Well, and I hate the term growing season because we have two growing seasons. This is the beginning of one growing season, the things that come back into growth this time of year, and the ending of another, the season that'll end with frost. But, you know, along the line of the Baptisia would be this Amsonia. You know, that's basically one plant. Now, most Amsonia aren't this big, but it's really pretty. This is real pretty in bloom in the fall, but this is an example of a plant that has multiple seasons of interest. You certainly grow it primarily for its spring flowers, but in another month or so, this is going to turn the bright yellow and then sort of honey gold. So some plants have multiple seasons of interest. Hibiscus coccinea, one of the wild parents of the big hybrids, you know, sure, it's spectacular in bloom. I love it all winter long because the stems are red in the summer, but in the winter they turn silvery and they're adorned with all the fruit. And so it's really, and it's a decent foliage plant in between. So it's, you know, I do ask, what does the plant look like after bloom? If the only thing it has is the floral display, well then that probably not going to be a major feature of a garden design if my goal is to have gardens filled with color year round. But if it has multiple seasons of interest, it becomes on a scale of 3, it might be a 3 instead of a 2. And what else was I going to say? And you know, the other way to get more color for a longer period of your time is, I just mentioned our two growing seasons. Some of the big summer things that disappear in the winter, you can plant winter growing and blooming things underneath it. Crinums totally disappear in the garden. They get about 6 foot wide, a big mound of, you know, octopus-like foliage all summer, and then it disappears in the winter. You can plant things like blue starflower under it, which is dormant all summer, starting to come back up, and so you have the starflower foliage all winter, and then it's in bloom for almost 2 months in the summer. So sometimes subletting the same space so you have plants that are in bloom at different times of the year when one is dormant and the other one is active is another way to get more color in a garden. You know, vertical plants, vines, a lot of vines are difficult to use, but small vines like some of the clematis, Manetia, the little firecracker vine, oh Lord, I said that because Cheryl has the most incredible display of Manetia. I've never seen anything close. But you know, it's a small scale vine that you could easily train on an 8-foot pole and have these red flowers all summer. So you could, you know, if you needed more color right here, you could put a post in there and have this column of red. It's something we normally sell, but don't currently have it for sale. So, you know, are there other questions?
Is there an app that would help you? You know, you could look and it would say, this is its, you know, spectacular look at this time, and this is the texture, and you know, with pictures, so you can use an app and design. Is that too easy?
There probably no end to things. I'm just not the person to ask for that.
Planting guides, you know, for the year or whatever. I may have one or two of them. And Gertrude Jekyll, she was a garden designer in England. She was the person who decided to do drifts of color.
Oh, cool.
And so she has planting guides. There are books. They've reproduced her books, and they have planting guides by month.
What was the last name again?
Jekyll. It's like Jekyll.
Yeah,
Mr.
I think she did pronounce it Jekyll. I think so.
They
She's sort of the mother of the modern herbaceous perennial border.
Yes.
You know, before then, poor plant lovers had cottage gardens.
Yeah.
And she's coming at the tail end of the Victorian era. She probably grew up during the Victorian era where it was carpet bedding. You know, planting sort of like at Epcot Center where it's a rug mat of red pelargoniums and a rug mat of blue dwarf ageratums and all planted geometrically. They were more trying to recreate the look of a Persian carpet than celebrate flowers. And in a cottage garden, plants were allowed to grow in their natural habit, all mingling with each other, and she sort of took that element and made it what we now think of it as perennial borders. You know, I've always loved herbaceous perennials, but I don't think I ever plan gardens nowadays that are entirely just herbaceous perennials, because the woody plants are one thing. You know, a lot of woody flowering shrubs are blooming before a lot of herbaceous perennials start, so that's another way to extend your color display. You know, you think of all the spring blooming shrubs, at that time herbaceous perennials are just barely starting, but so that can add color early on. And also the woody plants add an element of permanent structure to a garden. You know, it took me the longest time to figure out what was wrong with some of my gardens. It's like it all disappears in the fall, and you know, if you have woody plants there, and you know, here we also have winter blooming shrubs, so it's quite easy to have flowers year round. And one thing I love about Gertrude Jekyll is that in one of her books on design, there's a book of photography that was published, I think, long after she died, but it was her photographs, and she found black and white photographs really useful because it's easy to have colorful displays, but in a black and white photo, you're not distracted by the color, and so you're made more aware of the shapes and textures and how they're working or not working in a particular composition. She has one photograph was like all different variations on aster type flowers. And a black and white photo, so you didn't see any of the color, but you saw how even though they were all the shape, there were different sizes and it worked all together. So black and white photography can be a useful tool. Yeah.
Well, and visiting different places at different times of the year. That's why you come to all the open gardens.
Thank you. You know, one thing that has frustrated me all my life is when, you know, people say, "Oh, you know so much about plants. Where did you go to school?" Well, I do have a BS in plant science, but that wasn't the end of my education.
That's
and
just
one of the
beginning.
Thank you. Yes,
Just
exactly.
the beginning.
Yeah.
It's the introduction.
Well, we have the you all can know everything there is to know about gardening, but you don't have to have formal training. And as far as
Thank God.
design,
Or I'd be out of luck.
and you know, as far as garden design or plants, a huge part of my education, self-education, is visiting gardens. Oh, you know, I read about this plant, but I've never seen it in person. There's something to learn, really come to know the plant, or maybe even grow it yourself, but you see what it looks like. You see what it looks like after a miserable summer. You see how big it gets. So visiting gardens are a real valuable part of our own education. So we are very lucky that Tony has always allowed us to visit these gardens. The Triangle area is incredible. We have Duke Gardens,
Right.
and I moved to North Carolina to Durham in 1979. Duke Gardens used to be boring. But in the recent decades, they are doing really fun horticulture. Like they're not embarrassed to do things just for making a beautiful display. They're not trying to be scientific in some parts of the garden where, you know, it's all about the science, the botany, and not about horticultural displays. The North Carolina Botanic Garden, you know, featuring a good range of our native plants. And then, you know, the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, our sister institution, a fabulous collection, stronger on woody plants than herbaceous, but all of those are worth visiting. And then there's some smaller semi-private gardens like Montrose and Hillsborough, or I can't even think some of the others.
There's the WRAL Azalea.
Oh yeah,
Garden.
yeah.
I went there
I've
this year.
been there.
It was so amazing.
Yeah, and if you go to the State Farmers Market, that's really close to the WRAL Garden. Yeah, that's right next to that new huge Catholic church on Western Boulevard. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you for your time. Good to see you.